She'll be gone in 2 years. Girls like that always are.
The day Sarah Cole married into the most powerful family in the city. Not a single person at that wedding believed she deserved to be there. Not the guests in their designer dresses. Not the photographers quietly snapping pictures of her simple bouquet next to the flower walls that cost more than her yearly salary. Not the family lawyer who had slid a prenuptial agreement across the table 3 days before the ceremony and watched her sign it without reading it fully, certain she was too naive to understand what she was giving up. And definitely not the mother of the groom, a woman named Claire Holt, who stood at the reception with a champagne flute in one hand and a smile so thin it could cut glass, and leaned toward her sister and whispered words that would eventually come back to haunt her. "She'll be gone in 2 years. Girls like that always are," Sarah heard her. She was 3 feet away, adjusting her veil in a mirror that Claire had not noticed, and she heard every single syllable. She did not cry. She did not flinch. She looked at her own reflection, straightened her back, and walked into the reception hall to dance with her husband. But she remembered Sarah Cole had always remembered everything. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have been watching for a while, you already know that the stories we tell on this channel are never just stories. They are mirrors. They reflect something real about what it means to be underestimated, overlooked, and counted out by people who never took the time to truly see you. Before we go any further, if this kind of story moves you, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one. Now let us get into it because this one is going to change the way you think about quiet people. Sarah grew up in a part of the city where nobody had grand plans. The kind of neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and stayed flickering for weeks before anyone came to fix them. Where the corner store knew your name not because it was charming, but because there was nowhere else to go. Where mothers worked double shifts and fathers worked overnight, and children learned very early that wanting things too loudly was a waste of energy, better spent on surviving. Her mother was a home health aide. Her father fixed elevators in office buildings he would never work inside. They were not poor in spirit. They were rich in the kind of love that does not come with receipts. But money was a thing that lived somewhere outside their front door, always passing by, never stopping in. Sarah decided at age 9 that she would become a nurse, not because someone inspired her, not because of a movie or a teacher or a speech. She decided it because her younger brother had an asthma attack one winter afternoon, and the ambulance took 19 minutes to arrive, and a neighbor, who happened to have nursing training, kept him breathing until help came. Sarah watched that neighbor work with her small hands and her calm voice and her complete and total certainty, and something in Sarah's chest clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. She wanted to be that certain. She wanted to be that useful. She wanted to be the person in the room when the room needed one. She worked her way through nursing school on scholarships and weekend jobs and sheer refusal to quit. She graduated third in her class. She got a position at one of the best hospitals in the city. She was good. Not just technically good, the kind of good that patients requested by name, that colleagues trusted with the hard cases, that supervisors quietly noted in files, and then forgot to act on because people like Sarah Cole were easy to take for granted. She had been taking for granted her whole life. She met Daniel Holt on a Tuesday night in November. He was not supposed to be memorable. He came into the emergency department with a cut on his forearm from a piece of glass he had walked into at a construction site he had been touring. He was wearing jeans and a plain gray jacket, no watch, no jewelry, no indication whatsoever of who his family was or what they owned. He sat in the waiting area for 40 minutes without complaining, which immediately distinguished him from every other person Sarah had triaged that night. When she finally brought him back and began cleaning the wound, he asked her how long she had been working there. Not as a pickup line, as a genuine question asked with the kind of attention that made her feel like the answer actually mattered to him. She told him 6 years. He said that was remarkable and looked like he meant it. She asked why he thought so. He said most people leave the hard jobs after 2. They talked for 40 minutes while she cleaned and dressed the cut. When he left, he thanked her by name, which she noticed because most patients never checked. He came back the next day with 2 cups of coffee and left them at the nurse's station with a note that had her name on it and nothing else. He did that for 3 days before she finally agreed to have coffee with him in person. She did not Google him until their 4th date. And when she did, she sat in her car in a parking garage and stared at her phone screen for a long time. Daniel Holt, only son of Richard Holt. Richard Holt, founder of Holt Capital Group, the 3rd largest private investment firm on the East Coast. Estimated net worth in the billions. Properties in 4 cities. a board seat on 2 universities, 3 magazine covers in the last decade. Sarah put her phone in her bag and walked into the restaurant. She did not behave differently. She did not ask different questions. She did not dress differently the next time they met. She was exactly who she had been before she knew, because she had decided something very quickly and very clearly in that parking garage. If this was going anywhere, it would go there honestly or not at all. Daniel noticed, he told her later, much later, that her complete indifference to his last name was the thing that made him certain. They dated for 2 years. She met his family at the 1-year mark. His father, Richard, was quiet and watchful in the way of men who had built things with their hands before. They built them with money. He shook Sarah's hand and looked at her for a long moment and then nodded, which Daniel told her afterward was the closest his father came to applause. His mother, Claire, was another matter entirely. Claire Holt was a woman who had spent 30 years curating the family's social image with the precision of an architect. She had opinions about everything and expressed them with a warmth so practiced it felt real until you noticed what it was covering. She was not cruel, she was careful. She was the kind of woman who never said the wrong thing out loud but made absolutely sure the wrong thing was felt. She looked at Sarah the way people look at something they are trying to appraise without being caught appraising. She asked about Sarah's family with her head tilted at exactly the right angle. She complimented Sarah's dress in a way that somehow also communicated that the dress was not quite right. She said all the correct things, and none of the true things, and by the end of the dinner, Sarah understood exactly where she stood. She was tolerated, not welcomed, tolerated. She married Daniel anyway, because Daniel was not his mother, because he looked at her like she was the whole argument, and everything else was just noise. Because when she told him about growing up with flickering streetlights and corner store credit, and a brother with asthma and a dream she had chased, on scholarships and sheer will, he did not look at her with pity. He looked at her like she had told him the most interesting story he had ever heard. She married him because he was good, and good was rarer than money. The wedding happened. The whisper happened. Claire Holt's words landed in Sarah's memory and stayed there like a splinter too deep to pull. And then the years passed. They were not easy years. The Holt family was a complicated machine, and Sarah had not been given a manual. There were events she was not told about until the day of. Introductions where her name was mentioned without her profession, and her profession was mentioned without respect. Business dinners where she sat at tables full of people who spoke to Daniel and looked through her. Family holidays where she was always slightly outside the frame of whatever photograph was being taken. She noticed all of it. She said almost none of it. What she did instead was learn. She watched how the business worked the way she had watched that neighbor work on her brother's airways, with complete attention and absolute patience. She listened during the dinners she was being looked through, she read. She asked Daniel questions at home that she never asked in public. She studied financial structures and investment strategy and corporate governance the way she had once studied pharmacology and patient assessment. Not because anyone asked her to, but because understanding things was the only power she had ever fully trusted. She was still nursing. She had never stopped. Not even after the wedding. Not even when Claire hinted very delicately twice that perhaps Sarah might consider a more suitable use of her time. Not even when the other wives at family events asked her with theatrical curiosity why she was still working as though it were an eccentric hobby she had not yet outgrown. She kept working because the work was real. Because when she was at the hospital, she was not Daniel Holt's wife. She was Sarah Cole, and Sarah Cole was very good at what she did. And then Richard Holt had a stroke. He survived it. But it changed things in the way that serious illness always changes things, shifting every assumption about what is permanent, revealing who holds what, forcing conversations that had been quietly avoided for years. Before we continue, if this story is pulling you in the way we think it is, share it with someone right now. Show it to a friend, a sister, a coworker, anyone who has ever been underestimated in a room full of people who thought they had it all figured out. Subscribe if you have not yet. Leave your location in the comments. We are building something real here together, and every person who finds this channel makes it bigger. Now let us keep going, because this is exactly where everything changes. Richard called Sarah to his bedside 2 days after the stroke, while he was still in the hospital. Daniel was in the room. Claire was not. He looked at Sarah for a long time the way he had looked at her the very first night they met. Then he said something that she would think about for the rest of her life. He said, "I watched you. For 5 years I watched you, and I never said it out loud because I thought you already knew. But you handled this family better than anyone I hired to manage it. You saw what needed to be seen. You never made it about yourself. and that is rarer than anything I have ever paid for. He paused. I am changing the succession structure. Daniel will lead operations. But I want you at the table, Sarah, not as Daniel's wife, as yourself. Sarah said nothing for a moment. Then she said, which table? Richard almost smiled. The one that matters. What happened in the 3 months after that conversation was not a fairy tale. It was work. The kind of quiet, relentless, nothing glamorous about it work that Sarah had been doing her entire life. She went through board documents and financial reviews with the same attention she brought to patient charts. She asked questions that occasionally made the company's senior advisors shift uncomfortably in their seats. She identified 2 areas of structural inefficiency in Holt Capital's mid-tier portfolio that had been generating quiet losses for years and which nobody had addressed because nobody had been willing to say out loud that the emperor had no clothes in those particular rooms. She said it, calmly, with documentation, with proposed solutions already attached. The board noticed. Claire noticed too, and what she noticed made her very uncomfortable in a way she did not know how to process gracefully. There was a board meeting in January. It was the first formal meeting after Richard's medical leave had been officially extended. It was the meeting where the succession question would stop being theoretical and start being structural. The meeting where chairs would be assigned and titles would be confirmed, and the shape of Holt Capital's next chapter would become visible. Sarah arrived alone. She wore a clean dark suit. She carried a slim leather folder. She had not told Daniel what she was planning to say because she had not planned a speech. She had simply decided to be completely, undisguisedly present in a room that had spent 5 years looking through her. She walked in. She saw Claire's face from across the room as Sarah took her seat, not beside Daniel, across the table, at the position Richard had designated, the lead chair. Claire's expression moved through 3 stages so quickly that only someone paying very close attention would have caught all 3. Confusion, calculation, and then something that Sarah recognized from years of bedside experience. Grief, not for the chair. For the story Claire had been telling herself about who Sarah was and what Sarah wanted and how long Sarah would last. The story was over. The meeting began. When Sarah spoke for the first time, the room went very still. Not because she said anything dramatic. Because she said something precise and prepared and completely informed, in the voice of someone who had been listening carefully for 5 years to a conversation she had never been formally invited to join. She laid out the findings she had documented. She proposed the restructuring she had modeled. She answered 3 questions from the board's outside counsel, with the kind of clean specificity that made it clear she had prepared for those questions before they were asked. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Richard's oldest board member, a man in his 70s who had been in that company since before Daniel was born, cleared his throat and said simply, "How soon can you start?" Sarah looked at him. "I already have," she said. The rest of that day was a blur of paperwork and handshakes and one very long phone call with the family's legal team. But the moment that stayed with Sarah, the moment she turned over in her mind later that evening, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink, was not the board's response or the legal confirmation or Daniel's expression of quiet, steady pride. It was the moment she had walked past Claire in the hallway afterward. Claire had been standing by the window, looking out at the city, and she had turned when she heard Sarah's footsteps. She had looked at Sarah for a long moment, not with the thin smile she had worn at the wedding, not with the careful politeness she had practiced for 5 years. With something much simpler, she said, "I misjudged you." 3 words. No qualifier. No explanation, no attempt to soften what she was admitting. Sarah looked at her for a moment. She said, "I know." And then she kept walking. Because Sarah Cole had not spent 5 years in that family waiting for an apology. She had spent 5 years becoming undeniable. And there was a difference between those 2 things that mattered more than anything anyone could say to her in a hallway. She was not angry. She was not triumphant. She was something much quieter and much more permanent. She was settled. That night she called her mother. Her mother, who was still working, still getting up early, still living in the neighborhood with the flickering streetlights that had since been fixed, but had stayed flickering long enough in Sarah's memory to mean something. She told her mother what had happened. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I always knew which table you were going to end up at. I just never knew whose room it was going to be in." Sarah laughed. "A real one, the kind that starts in the chest." "Mine," she said. "It turned out to be mine." People will look at a woman like Sarah and tell the story wrong. They will say she married into it. They will say she was lucky. They will say she was in the right place at the right time, as though the years of studying and listening and working and refusing to shrink herself were coincidences that happened to add up. They will say these things because it is more comfortable than the alternative. The alternative is that she built it. Slowly, quietly, in rooms where no one was watching, and in rooms where everyone was watching, and in rooms where they were watching, and had already decided not to see her. She built it the way she had built everything, from the nursing degree to the marriage to the knowledge that eventually unlocked the door. Everyone else was guarding, one careful, unhurried piece at a time. And when she finally sat in that chair and the room went still and she opened her mouth and spoke, she was not performing. She was not proving something. She was simply finally taking up exactly as much space as she had always deserved. If you made it to the end of this story, something in you recognized it. Maybe you have been Sarah in a room that looked through you. Maybe you are still in that room right now, building quietly, waiting for the moment the table turns. Or maybe you know someone who is. This story is for all of you. Subscribe to this channel right now if you are not already here. Leave a like if this one stayed with you. And drop your city or country in the comments because we want to know how far this is reaching. We will see you in the next one. Keep building. Nobody can take from you what you built in silence.